So my original research focus was on Navajo poetry and poetics, and I was very interested in Navajo poets who wrote in Navajo. And as I was doing research on the Navajo Nation in 2000, 2001, one of the things I began to be sensitive to were that there were the occasional signs in Navajo. And that, you know, to understand written Navajo poetry, I needed to also understand the kind of semiotic world in which writing existed among Navajos. And so part of that was to look at signs. And so over the years, I took a number of pictures of signs, and I talked to Navajo consultants about these signs. And over the last decade or so, these signs, there are a lot more Navajo signs in Navajo, or something that approaches Navajo, and we'll get to that, on the reservation than there used to be. And thinking about questions of globalization and super diversity, and how these kinds of signs, and some of these signs, if you ever read Jan Blomjaart's work about signs in China that have, or signs in London that are produced in China that have LCED, right? These kind of clear misspellings, right? Because the people who are creating these signs for menus in Chinese restaurants, for instance, or on Chinese restaurants, the signs at the Chinese restaurants, they don't approach English as a language, but rather as a set of icons and indexes, not as representing sound, but as representing Englishness. And as we'll see in here, similar kinds of things turn out to be happening. So for those of you who don't know where the Navajo Nation is, it's in the Four Corners region of the American Southwest. It covers parts of Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. It is roughly the size of West Virginia, but if West Virginia has about 1 million people, the Navajo Nation has on the reservation about 300,000 people. It's a very rural area. It's a high desert area. There's a mountain range that goes right through here, the Chusca Mountains, which divides kind of the Chinle Valley from, this is essentially desert. And then over here you have the mesas. And in here, this is a map not showing much of but you have the Hopi Reservation as well. And so the Hopi Reservation is surrounded by the Navajo Nation. And so this is the Navajo Nation. It is again a very rural place. I'll point out that where I've worked has been up here around Saline and Lucachicana, which are not on this map. And then more recently, I've lived in Shiprock, New Mexico, the last 6 summers. I've lived in the Shiprock area. And this is Window Rock, the capital. Most of my research has been from Ganado eastward. I have not spent as much time on the western part of the reservation. So most of the signs that I have will be from this eastern, from the central to the eastern part of the reservation. So this is the paradox. Sure, there are lots of signs in Navajo, but nobody pays attention to them. And this is at Se Bonita, which is a place in just outside of Window Rock. What's interesting about the sign is the way that it is legible to Navajos is that it is written in English. Right? This sign is not in Navajo. The assumption here is that if you speak Navajo, you are literate in English, not in Navajo. And that, in fact, is the case. Most Navajos are not literate in Navajo. Navajo is still relatively restricted in literacy. And yet, there is a growing number of signs in something kind of like Navajo. And this is what one of my consultants said that kind of got me thinking about all this, which is that, sure, there are all these signs in Navajo, but nobody pays attention to them. Well, that can't be true, right? Obviously, somebody pays attention to them because otherwise, why are they putting all these signs up? So somebody is paying attention to them. I think what he meant was Navajos aren't paying attention to them. So this is in Shiprock, and this is just, signs are all over the place on Navajo, on the Navajo land, right? And they have various kinds of iconic kinds of representations of things Navajo on them, but the vast majority of these signs are in English. There's only Tobaki, which is in Navajo, which for is an RV park. It's the place of water. And that's the only thing on this sign that is in Navajo. Again, most of the signs are in English. Here are some more signs. These are the kinds of signs these kind of homemade signs. This sign, Rexley Jim. Rexley Jim was a poet that I worked with. He is, when he ran for president of the Navajo Nation, one of his claims was that he is in fact literate in Navajo. He writes his poetry in Navajo. He's published 3 books of poetry in Navajo. Yeah, and in fact, in the debates, he only spoke Navajo. And so when they had news reporters for the debates, some of whom do not speak Navajo, they would just say, and Rexley Jim said something in Navajo, and then go on to the next candidate and give their response, which was in English. But his sign is in English. And he is someone who is very much associated with Navajo literacy and the Navajo language. And yet, when he ran for president, it was signs in English that he used. So this is a nice kind of example of grassroots literacy, right? If you think of grassroots literacy as kind of local instantiations of writing in Navajo. This is at the Navajo Arts and Craft Enterprise. They've plastered on one side, Happy Holidays. On the other side, Yatego Kishma Neotis, wishing you Neotis. Yatego Kishmish, Kishmish is Christmas. Happy Holidays, wishing you happy holidays. And so you get these kinds of examples of kind of grassroots literacy. They're not state-sponsored signs. They're not signs. This was done by the ladies who actually work in this store. You also get other forms of grassroots literacy. These signs are all over the place in the summer. Nida is the enemy wear ceremony, and it's a public event. And so there are a number of signs that are handmade on the reservation, often with an iconic kind of arrow for you to go to these kinds of events. This form doesn't necessarily align with the way that it's often orthographically written, but people know these signs. In the winter, there are Yebiche signs. Yebiches are the winter dances that are also public events and that people are supposed to go to. And so if you're driving on the Navajo Nation, most Navajos know this sign. They actually don't even need to read this sign to know what this means, right? That there is a ceremony here that they can go to. But you do find these signs all over the reservation. This is Shiprock's right here. So as it's going away from Shiprock. This was a coffee shop that was run by Gloria Emerson, and it had awe, gowe, which are 2 Navajo words for coffee. It has since closed down. Coffee shops on the Navajo Nation have about a 3-year shelf life, and then they close. But this was a very popular place for poetry readings and the like. And clearly, this example was meant to indicate Navajo. And you also get the iconic image of the coffee pot here. But these are, again, instances of grassroots kinds of literacy. She herself did this with help. And then you get these kinds of examples. This is also in Shiprock. This is a water tank near the San Juan River. To'e'ina is water, it is life. Water is life. And so you get this kind of beautiful graffiti that exists. But the interesting thing about this is that while this is a form of grassroots literacy, and is not done so much by the Navajo Nation so much as individuals, and it differs from the Awe Gowe one, where there is no translation. You have to either know what coffee means, or you can guess it is a loan word from Spanish. You do, in fact, have a translation pair here. And this is a very common practice on the Navajo Nation, which is that you create translation pairings. That you give the Navajo version and the English version of these things. So that the Navajo is always in dialogue with an English version. Some of these become very strange. And this is the picture for the top. This sign is so very, very interesting to me. Because one, the English is big, right? It's much bigger than the Navajo form. And who's going to read the Navajo form? Who is the audience for this, right? Who is the readership for this? Who is actually going to read this thing? What Navajo is going to go to the Northern Edge Casino and look not at the free valet parking, but down to the smaller, right, to see free parking, which is essentially what this says in Navajo, to see that and go, free parking, right? What is this doing? And that became a question for me. This is not to be read for reference. This is not propositional content, right? This is not about anything. It is in semiotic terms, it is indexical and iconic, right? It is indexical of a kind of Navajo space, and it's iconic of a different language, right? So it puts these two into dialogue iconically with the assumption that very few people are actually going to read this. And in fact, who is going to look at this? Who is the target audience for this? Is it Navajos? Or is it tourists who come to the casino and they don't want to just go to any casino, they want to go to a Navajo casino. And then they want to be able to say, Navajos, they even have Navajo on their valet parking, right? This is in many ways oriented outward towards tourists, towards the people who come to these casinos. On the other hand, you get these kind of school Navajos. And we'll talk about this a bit later as we move on. Many of these forms do not match with the orthography, the standard orthography that is used in Navajo. Some don't match in really very interesting ways and include sounds or combinations of sounds that do not exist in Navajo. These school Navajo forms, on the other hand, are the standard. This is the standard orthography in Navajo. They get the glottal stops, they get the high tones correct, they get the voiceless L. This is the standard orthography. This is what Navajos often call Young and Morgan, which is the Young and Morgan dictionary. And this is the standard. And so this is at Dene College, which is the Navajo Community College in Saline, Arizona. But again, these are translation pairs, right? The assumption is that if you don't know Navajo, if you can't read Navajo, and they teach Navajo literacy there, there's always the English form below it. That Navajo is always in relationship to English in some ways. It's framed in that way. Yeah, so here's another one. This is the school-sponsored sign, right? which is meals, cafeteria. But this sign right here, which you can't really read, is in English, and it says, "Come visit the college bookstore." It's in English. The kind of grassroots vernacular literacy is in English for content. This, again, is doing indexical and iconic work. This is meant to be read as propositional knowledge, right? It is meant to be read for content. This top part doesn't need to be read at all for propositional content. The assumption here is, what I'm trying to get at, is that much of what these signs are doing has nothing to do with being read for semantic meaning, but rather for creations of Navajo spaces and for indexing of difference. Again, these things are often associated with the casino. So this is another casino on the Navajo Nation, Fire Rock Casino near Gallup, New Mexico. And again, it's the sense of the exotic, right? That it has become a part of the experience of going to a Navajo casino is to learn how to say ahehe, right? Thank you in Navajo. Whereas everything else is in English. Everything else is in English, from the name of the place to all the various things that flash up on the bands and the weather and all that are all in English. But this one phrase in Navajo versus all this other English, right? So Navajo is marginalized in this kind of semiotic landscape. It's exoticized. These are grocery stores. And again, English is everywhere. And so you get dairy products in English, essentially milk products in Navajo. But English surrounds it. Again, you get the English surrounds it. And one of the things that happens here, right, is you get a false equivalence. So, atsi in Navajo doesn't mean meat, which one would get the sense that, in fact, it does mean meat. But si means meat. Is an indefinite possessive prefix. In Navajo, there are certain inalienable nouns. These nouns have to take a constant possessor. So meat, there is no meat. There's always something's meat, or somebody's meat, or shitsi, my meat, or bitsi, his, her meat. There is no meat. In English, of course, we don't have that kind of distinction. But this creates a kind of false equivalence between English and Navajo, that the Navajo form means meat, but in fact it has a more specific kind of sense to it. It means some things meat. And again, notice that all the other signs, and this was an accidental photograph. I only realized after I took it how interesting it was. That you get the dog food, the pet treats, the cat food, all of those things are in English. But then meat, and there's no poultry, right? There's just meat here. But again, Navajo becomes exotic. And this is in a grocery store in Window Rock, Arizona, that is, in fact, the capital of the Navajo Nation. Again, you get the English predominating all over the place. This form, the second form here, is a curious thing, because Navajo does not have this segment in it, two T's next to each other. It doesn't exist. It does not exist in Navajo. This should be the voiceless L, outside, right? It should be that. Instead, it's at. This thing has been up there for several years. It has not been changed. Most Navajos I know who are literate in Navajo, know that this is not a Navajo word. In fact, they don't mind pointing out that it's a strange kind of thing that is up there. This means various kinds of various, yeah, that's good. But that form stays up there. There's been no outcry to have this changed, to have this voiceless L inserted into it, which again, the literate Navajos that I've worked with recognize that this form doesn't make any sense in Navajo. There are T's in Navajo. As a linguist, I can tell you they're not really T's, but for purposes here, they're T's. But they're not in a geminate kind of combination. So then you get these kind of semi-translation pairs. So those are the kinds of translation pairings. Now you get a kind of semi-translation pairing. This is the Kingdom Hall in Chinle, Arizona. It's curious for me. I find this interesting, right? Because on the one hand, Jehovah, the way that it's written here in Navajo, in English, that H, we don't pronounce it. We know we don't pronounce it, right? We Jehovah. There's no H there. In Navajo, they do pronounce word final H's. So it's Gah, not Gah, which is a different word. Gah. And so this actual writing right here tells you to say this as Jehovah, not Jehovah, which is not how you pronounce it. At least I do not pronounce it that way in English. Notice also that it appears that Kingdom Hall cannot be translated into Navajo. But that seems to be something that is uniquely Navajo, because here is the Kingdom Hall in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and clearly you can try to translate it into Spanish. So for some reason, Kingdom Hall doesn't appear to be translatable. Witnessing, which would seem like the more interesting thing, does translate into Navajo, but Kingdom Hall does not. So those are the kind of translation pairings. The next kind of thing that happens are these calkings. And by calkings, I mean that they take the logic of English and they simply use it in Navajo. So there are, in fact, very few street signs on the Navajo Nation. This area in Fort Defiance has several. There are a couple of street signs up in Shiprock, but most streets on the Navajo Nation do not have street signs. In fact, some Navajos that I know, this is a point of frustration because you can't do certain kinds of financial transactions. You can't order things to be delivered to your home on the Navajo Nation because they don't have street signs. They don't have street numbers. They don't have those kinds of basic, basic kinds of markings, bureaucratic markings of streets, right? They don't have those kinds of things. Here in Navajo, in Fort Defiance, this is actually right next to the high school, you do get Ka'igunen. And obviously, the sign in Navajo doesn't reproduce the form as it is often. It gives you a sense that there's supposed to be a glottal stop after the G, because that's usually what the apostrophe means there. So it's go on it, but in fact it's a high tone that's supposed to be. These are all high tones. This is actually a voiceless L. It's not L, it's not Lai, it's Lai. And again, note that all the other signs are in English. Up with the Inuit, most stop signs are actually in the Inuit syllabic system and in English. So they could do such things, but most of the signs again exist in English. And the logic here is English of First Street, Second Street, Third Street, Fourth Street. Which gets us to, this did not come out. So diff. in Navajo, there is no F in Navajo. There is no sound. There is no sound in Navajo. This should be D, which is a nasal I, a long nasal high tone I. D gone, not diff gone. This sign, right? Whoever wrote this sign had no idea what Navajo looked like. They saw, and it's unfortunate this did not come out. Didn't they have a piece of paper? Right? Draw you the nasal eyes. So it has hooks under it, right? And so they have high tones and hooks under them. Pass it around. So whoever, they probably got a piece of paper that had that on it and looked at it and said, I don't know Navajo, but that sure looks like an F to me. And so they put an F onto this sign. And because whoever made that sign, again, Navajo wasn't a language. It was a series of characters, right, to be represented on a sign. Likewise, that's probably what happened why you get that glottal stop there, the apostrophe there, instead of an acute accent, right? That whoever did this didn't know Navajo. And again, this sign has been there forever, at least the last five years or so. And there is no great outcry about this. Right? There are no letters to the editor in the Navajo Times talking about the fact that this sign, diff goni, right? It doesn't make sense in Navajo. Which again becomes kind of a curious thing, because you think of an example, a famous example of this was in Hawaii, right? Where the Hawaiian Convention Center, they used, in Hawaiian, it is a straight apostrophe is the glottal stop, not a curved apostrophe. A curved apostrophe is not the glottal stop. The Hawaiian Convention Center wrote Hawaii with the I and then a curved apostrophe and then an I, and it became a huge controversy, right? Letters were written by Native Hawaiians about the fact that they had written that word incorrectly, that was not in fact Hawaiian, that apostrophe, that curved apostrophe was not a symbol in the Navajo and the Hawaiian orthography, and it had to be a straight apostrophe. Navajos have made no such concerns about either atasi or diff. And it leads to, again, that question at the very beginning. Sure, there are lots of signs in Navajo, but nobody pays much attention to them. I mean, I paid attention to them. This is not a translation parrot, but it can lead you astray because it's on Diné College in St. Lee, and it has all the appearances of, in fact, being a translation parrot of Kenyani Library. And if you had seen all the other signs, right, we had looked at with the Navajo form and the English form, you would, if you saw this, what would you think? Kenyani is library, but it is not. It is actually one of the clan names. It is named after a particular clan, the Towering House clan. This is, in essence, I'll show you another example of it as well. It's like Diné restaurant, right? Which is the Navajo restaurant, Navajo people, right? Diné, their term for self-identification, right? It's a kind of branding, right? It's a qualifier to these, right? So this sign is Kenyani Library. There is no word on here for library, right? So this is a bilingual sign. Neither side of it tries to translate the other. And again, you see that with Diné restaurant, but of course it's got welcome here as well. instead of any kind of Yate or any kind of, and we'll get to Yate, any kind of Navajo, it's Dene restaurant.
But as a person, native English speaker, I would look at that and think about dining.
Yes, yes,
I mean,
in fact.
seriously, I would see dine, restaurant. I would not see any Navajo in there at all. It's all English to me.
Yes, and that actually happens. And people, people I've talked to at Dene restaurant will talk about, I went to dine restaurant, right? Because, they don't. I will say, in the Southwest, Dene is a term that many Southwesterners know as a term for Navajo. But it's like Canyon, and we'll get to this as well. It's like Canyon de Chelly. If you say Canyon de Chelly, people know you're not from the Southwest, right? Likewise, if you say dine, people sense you're not from the Southwest. And it's absolutely correct that people often dine in restaurants, which is a nice little interlingual pun. So, in the mid-2000s, there was a movement among many of the local communities to change their names from English names. In this case, this place was Hogback, which is a flat piece of rock, to Sit-Tak-On, rock that slants into the water. And the T and the D, a D is unaspirated, a T is aspirated. They're the same in voicing. So just in English, we make a distinction between voiced and voiceless. In Navajo, it's between aspirated and non-aspirated. And so you often see T and D interchanged in Navajo signs and in Navajo writing. So you get this sign, which is an assertion of the traditional Navajo place name. And place names in Navajo are very important. Place names are the words of the ancestors. They are quotations, right? They are the quotations of ancestors who first saw the place and gave it a name. Many Navajos will tell you that you have to use the Navajo place name. You cannot translate place names into English because the ancestors who saw these places didn't speak English. And so many of the poets I worked with wrote place names in Navajo, not in English, because these place names are fundamental to Navajo understandings of their place in the world. They often have morality associated with it. Various things happen at places, and they know those things by these names. Place names are really important among Navajos. And so there was a trend among chapters, which are local, regional political units, to change their names back to what were recognized as the local place names. And so you get this is in between Farmington and Shiprock, if you remember the map. But again, it's chapter house, right? So it's the name of the chapter is in Navajo, but the chapter house is in English, and of course, healthy living is a plus, and various other things that come flashing up on this. Again, English predominates here, but the place name is in Navajo. This was in 2009. Shortly thereafter, the Navajo Nation began to build a number of casinos, and you now have this sign. They tore down that other sign, which I found to be very beautiful, and they put up Flowing Water Navajo Casino, and again, Sit-Tak-On chapter house. And this was taken in the winter when it was 55 degrees. But again, this is for orienting. Now this is what interests me. So the previous example can be seen as local pride by Navajos in place naming, right? But there's another pattern that we've been talking about here, which is the use of Navajo at casinos and the way that it creates an exotic. And so while this clearly predates the casino and the switch to Navajo as a kind of assertion of indigenous identity and indigenous placedness, Navajo placedness, when it gets coupled here now, that value seems to also get changed, doesn't it? At least in my sense of this, not only does it have that association, but now it becomes like a hey. It becomes a part of the exotic experience of going to a Navajo casino. This is another place name, Natanines, which is Tall Leader, which was named after a famous superintendent up in the Shiprock area. And you get these kind of local restaurants. And again, these place names, and I want to suggest that these place names become very, very common. Here's another one. This is also in Shiprock. Again, you'll note the English is all over the place. Shiprock is known by a number of names. In Navajo, Natanines, Tok, which is the river, Toti, which is at the river, and here you get this person in clinic, Tomi, the people of Shiprock, for instance. And again, the fabric and all that is all in English. But this is a major thoroughfare through Shiprock, and lots of people go by. Just for point of reference, right here was the coffee shop. So they were right next to each other, the Awe Gowe. This is another example with the trading post, Totso, Big Water. And these signs, again, this is in Lukachikai. This is an interesting one. This fits the trend we were talking about just before of local communities changing the names. Burnham, New Mexico, or Tissotsikad, big cottonwoods spread out or in a concave area, is in the middle of nowhere. You have to really want to go to Burnham to get to Burnham. The only reason that Burnham has become really very kind of important for a lot of Navajos is that Desert Rock power plant was supposed to be built out here. And there has been a huge amount of resistance coming out of Burnham, out of Tissotsikad, about trying to stop that power plant from happening. And what you can see here, if it's not clear, is they've actually kept the sign, and they've simply put a 2x4 over it with the painting of the Navajo form of it. Again, though, everything else is in English. Right? But it's clearly, it's a part of the trend of changing names back to the traditional place names. The other trend is with these shopping centers. So there are a number of shopping centers out on the reservation. This one is in Chinle. Sei is the Navajo term for what became Canyon Deshe. Deshe is an interlingual attempt at Sei, between the rocks. And of course you get the iconic image of it with, in this case, luckily there had been a bird there, so you also get a little of that. But you get the place name coupled with the shopping center. It brands it again. It makes it, and no Navajo that I know ever says, we're going to Sei Shopping Center. They say things like, we're going down to the city market, we're going to the Bashes, we're going to the Burger King, or they pun those things. But people don't use, Navajos that I know do not use these. They don't say, I'm going to Sei Shopping Center.
What about, can I ask you something?
Yeah.
What about, for instance, that you say that the Navajo, you should have that accent like this, and it's not.
Right. Yeah. So in Navajo, Sig has a high tone on it. In this sign, it does not. There is no high tone on it at all. Again, Navajos have not made any outcry about that. It does not align with the kind of the way that the Navajo language is often thought to be written. It does have the glottal stop at the end of it, though. So the glottal stop seems to be important here, but the high tone does not. In some of these other examples, So this is just these are all over the place. These shopping centers, often with some kind of iconic image next to it. This is Crown Point. This is strange because it creates two words for this sound. Tlo is a single sound in Navajo, and the way that they've written it here, it's dit tloi. But tlo is a single sound in Navajo. They've actually separated a single sound that's written with two graphemes and made them into two different words right in the sound. Whoever did this, again, Navajo is not a language that they are familiar with. Or not, the Navajo writing system is not a language that they're familiar with. And then to get, so here you get Sepitai, which is winged rock, and the famous Shiprock pinnacle. But they don't use the acute accents here for the high tone. They use the tilde, right? And so, which is a very strange kind of thing. And they use it on this old sign. Again, and this is in Shiprock, which is, again, in Navajo, not known as Shiprock. The Shiprock community is Natani Nez or Todi. The pinnacle, Shiprock, is Sepitai, and that's a fair distance away. You can see it from Shiprock, the community, not called Shiprock in Navajo. But so this sign is about the pinnacle, the tourist attraction in many ways, like the Sei sign. And then this newer sign, they still use the tilde, right? They're still doing it. And now it kind of has, it makes it look kind of like a translation pair, but Shiprock in English is a nice descriptive term, right? It describes something and it gives the sense of the form, but it evokes a very different image for me than a winged rock. Though again, they're supposed to name ostensibly the same feature. And again, this sign is just massively English, except for the little Navajo here. So you see how important these place names are. This led to, there is a street sign in Fort Defiance, Arizona, and I have the newspaper here. I also have an image of it that I took this morning. But so you can see Kit Carson, right? So Kit Carson Drive is the street sign in Fort Defiance. The chapter in Fort Defiance wanted to rename Kit Carson Drive as Sehotsoi, the place of the Rock Meadow, which is a traditional name for Fort Defiance. They did not want to use Kit Carson's name. Kit Carson was, in Navajo views, was responsible for rounding up the Navajos, causing a great deal of harm to Navajos in 1863 and 1864, and then initiating what Navajos call the Long Walk, which is a forced walk from the Navajo Nation across northern New Mexico to Bosque Redondo, Huelde, Fort Sumner, where they were incarcerated for 4 years until 1868, when they were able to negotiate a return. Many Navajos died at Bosque Redondo at Huelde, the place of tears. It was a traumatic experience for Navajos. It is a moment that solidified Navajo views about themselves, made many Navajos recognize their Navajo versus other Native groups. And Kit Carson is, for many Navajos, the villain. He was the person who went into Canyon de Chelly and burnt down the orchards and burnt down the cornfields. And so the tribe And the chapter, Fort Defiance chapter, wanted to change the name of the road to this traditional Navajo place name. There was pushback from non-Navajos that said essentially that had Carson not been involved, more Navajos would have died. So that in fact, because of the sensitivity of Kit Carson, only some Navajos died. But if it had been somebody else besides Kit Carson, then more Navajos would have died. Which of course is one of the laziest arguments you can possibly make. Because on the other hand, one could say, had it been somebody else besides Kit Carson, fewer Navajos would have died, right? I mean, there is no empirical evidence to support the claim that more Navajos would have died had it not been for Kit Carson. But I will say that this happened in 2006. It is still Kit Carson Drive. That the pushback on the Fort Defiance chapter was significant. Even though Navajo historian Jennifer Dennett-Dale, Navajo novelist Irvin Morris came out and wrote very strong letters defending this change, the pushback was actually quite strong. And then this was taken in my office using the Navajo lexicon to hold it down in case you didn't get the chance to see it. So these place names become important, right? These place names, the Navajo place name links to ancestors. Kit Carson links to non-Navajo stuff, right? It indexes a different kind of thing, and Navajos wanted the Navajo place name to index Navajo-ness. Again, even though nobody would read that sign, or few people would read that sign, the fact that it should be in Navajo was important, and the fact that it was based on traditional kind of Navajo place naming practices was important, even if street signs are a relatively new kind of thing. So while in some ways, these Navajo signs, they're very confusing, right? In that some of them clearly seem to exoticize Navajo. Some of them treat Navajo not as a language at all, but just as a group of graphemes linked together, and you can have things like Difgonin. On the other hand, when they do link to place names, there's often a kind of counter argument that Navajos are making, especially in this case, where they wanted the sign to be in Navajo. Which leads me to this wonderful sign at the opening of the Northern Edge Navajo Casino. Does this sign create a Navajo space as you walk into this casino with Yata-E? Or does it do something else? And what in fact does this do here, right? And that really, this sign is really kind of the thing that kind of makes me think about these things. And it's this kind of stuff that I actually would like to get some feedback about, to think about how to talk about this stuff. And then just as my acknowledgments. So that's what I've been doing with these signs, and I'm still trying to think through them. I wanted to kind of create a kind of typology of what are the kinds of ways that they're doing things. These pair translations, these calkings, these semi-pair translations, these bilingual signs, and then what are the kinds of the content of them, but also what are their forms. And most of the signs don't align, except for the school Navajo, don't align with the kind of orthography that you find in the dictionaries and taught in the schools. They have something else going on. And then you have all of that grassroots stuff, which is to me also very interesting, because those are signs that people pay attention to. Some of these other signs, less so. That's it.